Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Seth.
And I'm Zach.
And we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right. We are.
That's right.
Always classy, sometimes always classic, sometimes classy.
Happy spring. The winter's thawing out. We're
That's
finally
right.
able to get some heat into the studio. Been raining a lot, though, which brings with it its own positives. Fresh water to drink.
We can get some water into that area where we grow the potatoes.
Fun. Zach, what have you recently been playing?
Seth, recently I've been playing Doom. After we spent a lot of time talking about Doom, I decided to play some Doom. Specifically, I wanted to play a version I never played, which this version is the PlayStation version. I don't own the PlayStation version of Doom, which originally came out in 1995, but the PlayStation version of Doom had a source port done, so you can play it on the PC.
Wait, Doom for the PlayStation?
Yes.
And it's called Doom?
Doom is the name of the source port.
But it's the PlayStation Doom that you are playing on the PC.
Now let me tell you why you would want to play the PlayStation version of Doom on the PC, or just in general. Doom is a source port of the version of Doom for the PS1. The most recent version came out in 2023, was developed by Derek Coy, and has a variety of features. Not only does it let you play the PS1 versions of Doom and Final Doom, but you can also play them in 1080p with high resolutions, which is nice. The reason I wanted to play the PS1 version of Doom is because it is different from the PC version of Doom, substantially. For one thing, the game has unique lighting effects, which make the game feel darker and overall just feel like a different game. Some of the levels are completely restructured. Some of the levels are new. A couple of the levels have been redesigned. But another important thing is that the soundtrack is completely original to this version of Doom. This is a soundtrack done by Aubrey Hodges, who would later go on to do the music for Doom 64. Hodges' music, for those who are unfamiliar, is more horror ambient themed versus the metal riffs that you would get when listening to the original Doom soundtrack. I really like Aubrey Hodges' soundtrack. I mean, I love the original Doom soundtrack. I think it's great. And when you want to get your blood pumping and you really want to feel cathartic, pop in the original DOS version of Doom. But if you want to play Doom as if it's a horror game, then play the PS1 version of Doom. The lighting makes the game darker and frightening, and the ambient horror sounds that Aubrey Hodges has crafted just make the game feel haunting. I legitimately had a jump scare moment playing Doom, which is not a game that is considerably scary if you think about it. You're going around blowing monsters up with rocket launchers. But because of his soundtrack, putting you in this mood, it really did make me have a jump at one moment when I opened a door and there was 3 imps behind the door. And the soundtrack just works really well with the vibe of this version of Doom. You know, you have these dark hallways and you'll be hearing the sound of chains dragging along the floor. When you enter hell, you hear the sound of screams in the background. It's interesting. He did a great job with the soundtrack. I'm really impressed by Aubrey Hodges' work, and I really wish that more people got to experience it, because you only got to experience it if you played the PS1 version of Doom or Doom 64, which has its own unique ambient horror soundtrack. So Doom is a way to experience that on the PC. You do need to have copies of the original Doom or Final Doom from PlayStation to get them to run, though you can find copies available, and it's neat. I like it. It's definitely a unique way to play Doom. It's kind of like playing Doom for the very first time, even after you've already played it a million times.
Yeah, so when you said the game was Doom, you remember that game called PsyOps?
Yeah, I'm not playing PsyOps.
I thought it was PsyOps, but in Doom.
That'd be fun. Remember PsyOps had a co-op mode where one person controls the legs and one person controls the shooting, but you're the same guy?
Yeah, I do recall. That game is a gem.
I love PsyOps. It's a silly game. You can blow people's heads up in it.
We should do an entire episode on PsyOps.
And that's why we're doing today's episode, Seth. It's actually on PsyOps. I just Control A, Control V, and all new notes pop in.
It was during the time that PsyOps came out. There was a lot of psychic games that were really popular.
Anyway, Seth, what have you been recently playing? Have you been playing PsyOps?
I have not. Recently, though, I have been playing Marvel vs. Capcom 2 New Age of Heroes, which was developed by Capcom and originally released on Japanese arcades in 2000 and then ported to Dreamcast, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, Xbox, and Xbox 360. I've been playing it on my arcade system, which is a arcade system that I talked about last episode that I got that my brother helped me build. It was done by Arcade Arcade 1-Up, and it's the Deluxe X-Men, and it's got a bunch of Capcom X-Men games on it, and one of the games is Marvel vs. Capcom 2. My wife really likes this game because she's a big fan of BB Hood, which is from the Darkstalkers series. In the game, if you're not familiar with Marvel vs. Capcom 2, you pick 3 fighters, and you have 99 seconds to defeat the other side. The way the arcade is set up is that you have a joystick, and then you have 6 buttons. The 3 top are all punching. Specifically for Marvel vs. Capcom 2, there's a light punch and a medium punch, and then there's the assist button, and then the bottom buttons are all kicks, and there's a light kick and a medium kick, and then an assist button. And the assist button will summon your other fighter to the screen to fight. My wife was really good at changing them out, though she didn't know what she was doing to do that. And I was just very good at summoning them for a very brief time. I think one of our first rounds, I had Dr. Doom, Magneto, and I think it was Juggernaut. I think it was Dr. Doom, Magneto, and Juggernaut. And my wife was playing as BB Hood, Cammy, and Chun-Li. And the way the game works is if you win, you keep your team, and the other person has to make a new team. So I had very many iterations of teams because my wife is very good at the game. So I did try to do a Summers game where I did, there's no Jean Grey, so I just did Cable and Cyclops, and then I had somebody else random join them, like a Sentinel or something like that.
Nice. The true Summers family.
The true Summers family. And then, yeah, I like trying to make odd combinations of fighters. I kept making the Shugamatha, the eye guy with the tentacles. I think he's from Capcom. I think he's also from the Darkstalker series, but he's like the tentacle Cthulhu creature. I kept accidentally picking him. We learned how to do moves, which involve doing like movements with the joystick and then hitting either both the 2 combinations of buttons to do your special move. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I think we played like 8 or 9 rounds, and I won once.
Do you mean Shumagorath?
Yeah. Is he from Marvel?
Yeah, he's a Doctor Strange villain.
Oh, yes. Yeah. That's right. Anyway, it's a really great game. I really enjoy the Arcade 1-Up. It's a fun addition to the house. It's got some really good art on it that look like it's from X-Men 97 because that's where it's from. And it's just an overall great experience. I also like is that it's the deluxe version. A lot of the Arcade 1-Ups you need like a riser to bring them up to your level to play as an adult, or you need like a chair or something. I don't particularly like the risers, so the deluxe ones don't have risers, which is nice.
Nice. So they're big.
Well, they're the same size, but without a riser. It was a pain in the butt to drop it down, but that was pretty much the only issue with the build. I did, though, the ones that don't have risers, you could probably put on a mini fridge, but I don't think I'm going to get another one anytime soon. So
I might have missed it, but did you describe BB Hood?
No, I didn't.
My favorite detail about BB Hood is that she's Little Red Riding Hood, but she also has an Uzi.
Yeah, she has an Uzi, and she has some hunter friends that show up sometimes and just kill people. Yeah. They're like hunters, but they're not like the huntsmen because they show up with machine guns that come and like, yeah, she's definitely not the Red Riding Hood that the Big B would be. Big B would be scared. Big B being the character from the Fables comics.
Well, to get us into today's episode, this is kind of an interesting episode because we're covering a topic that we've previously talked about. We've talked about bootleg games before, but we're going to be focusing specifically on bootleg games where Sonic is on a system he doesn't belong, specifically Nintendo systems. And we're not talking about like official Nintendo games. So we're not going to be talking about like Sonic Advance or the Sonic Adventure DX or Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, which were on the GameCube. No, we're going to be talking about bootleg Sonic games on the Famicom, and we'll briefly talk about the Super Famicom. So let's place set us here. Back when Seth and I were both kids, one of our favorite games to play was Sonic the Hedgehog 2. And to this day, I know I personally still love Sonic, and I think I can speak for Seth when I say that Seth still likes Sonic the Hedgehog.
I do.
He was a significant part of our childhood, and I think he represents kind of that nostalgia of gaming. Like when I think of video games, especially from my youth, I kind of automatically will just think of Sonic. When I was little, something Seth also introduced me to was the concept of emulation. One day he brought home, I think from a friend's house, a burned CDR that had a copy of Nesticle Model, SNES 9X, No Money Game Boy, and Gens on it. Each had a collection of games that you could play, and I was enthralled by this because I was able to play games that I had never heard of because we were a Sega family. So I remember playing Pokemon Red and Blue, I remember playing Harvest Moon, I remember playing that Game Boy James Bond game that we talked about with Josh way back. A whole bunch of games that were just not part of the games that we were playing as kids because we were a Sega family. And one of the games that I stumbled upon in this collection was in the Nesticle section, and this was a game called Somari the Adventurer, which was one of my first exposures to the world of bootlegs. Now, around this time, I personally was being introduced to the beauty of the internet and had stumbled across some very early websites in the Sonic community, specifically the Secrets of Sonic Team, and a now defunct website called Sonic Cult. Both sites had dedicated sections that covered bootleg Sonic games, and I learned that Somari wasn't just some ROM that existed, on the CDR. It had a physical release. It had a physical cartridge, and I told myself at that time, little tiny Zach said, I need this. Over the next couple of years of my life, I spent looking for Somari. I was naive in the search. I had no idea how to look. I didn't really know about message boards. I spent most of my time on eBay and Yahoo auctions, and eventually I gave up my search. Though one day, our good friend Barry, friend of the podcast, messaged me and said, hey, there's a listing for a Somari cartridge on eBay, and he sent it to me and I bought it. And since then, I have now collected all versions of Somari that we're going to be talking about. So not just Somari, but I've collected all of the Somari variants, and that's all thanks to Barry. Now, Seth, why don't you tell us a bit about what exactly Somari is?
Sure. So Somari the Adventurer was developed by Hummer Team, which is a Taiwanese game development studio that was founded in 1992 by some former staff of a company called Computer and Entertainment, or C&E for short. From the information that we can find, the team was led by a man named Hummer Chang, who was also a composer and programmer on their various projects. What is helpful is that some of the games developed by Hummer Team features credits. Those credits have been useful to identify some of the developers, though some of the developers went by nicknames. Hummer Team's first game was an RPG titled Jing Qi Jin Juan. The game is a fairly straightforward RPG where you take on the role of Jing Qi, a famous individual in Chinese history who attempted to assassinate Qin Shi Huang, one of China's first emperors. Their next title would be Street Fighter II: The World Warrior, which is really what Hummer Team became known for, which is their demake and backports of games to the Famicom hardware. Street Fighter II: The World Warrior is a fascinating game as it's a fully playable version of the original game. They weren't the developers behind Street Fighter II: World Warrior. They were the developers of Street Fighter II: The World Warrior for the Famicom.
Yes.
Which is different than the one that was developed by Capcom. So Street Fighter II: The World Warrior is a fully playable version of the original game on the Famicom. It's a bit more simple with only 4 playable characters and a variety of spelling errors, but the game is still there and playable. Hummer Team's work on Street Fighter II: The World Warrior for the Famicom did not go unnoticed. The game was a success for them as countless numbers of units would be sold throughout mainland China and Taiwan. The exact sales numbers for these types of games are pretty impossible to track down, but the sheer number of versions of this version of the game would be relatively endless. One of the main reasons that sales numbers and figures for these type of games is because they're bootlegs, so they're not legitimate, and people who sell illegitimate games don't generally report to any sort of financial business or publication their sales.
Right, but it is important to note these companies were operating somewhat legitimately in China and Taiwan.
Right.
Like games like Hummer Team Street Fighter and Somari have copyright patents in these countries, but they didn't publicly disclose their sales data, and they weren't reporting to shareholders. These were privately run companies.
Right. Now, the game also saw a re-release the same year it came out in 1992 with Master Fighter II: The World Warrior, which may have been the publisher's attempt at making the game more palatable for the international market, because they can't decidedly release Street Fighter II: The World Warrior in any market where Capcom has any sort of legal authority. Now, Hummer Team's next few games would be iterations on the same formula. Master Fighter 6 6 and Street Fighter 4, which made some enhancements such as improved graphics, more stages, and even some original characters. And in 1994, they would put Samari with GD Industry co-publishing the game. Now, Zach, correct me if I'm wrong, but does Hummer Team, do they have issues with counting?
Maybe. I don't know why they went from 2 to 6, beyond the fact that there is this weird trend you'll notice in bootleg games where other publishers will pick up the game and sometimes just add an extra number to it. So like Street Fighter, the Famicom game, got published by other publishers beyond the original publisher, Konisoft, and they would add like 3 to it, and then like 4, and then 5. And I think it was just a way of these companies to like try to outstep each other, right? You go to the local market where these games are being sold, you see a cartridge labeled Street Fighter 3 and a cartridge labeled Street Fighter 2, and you tell yourself, oh, I already got Street Fighter 2, I'm gonna grab Street Fighter 3. It's the same game, it just has a different label this time. So
oh man, how disappointing is that when you get home?
I know, right? And you're going to hear about how that kind of comes into play when it comes to these Samari variants later. Samari itself is kind of difficult to put into words if you've never played it yourself. You play as the titular Samari, who could be easily mistaken for Mario. However, he has some key differences. For one, Mario is a Brooklyn plumber. Samari is a Brooklyn plumber who can run really fast and can jump into a ball. So those are the differences. In the game, you go through the various levels of Sonic 1, but reduced in graphics. So instead of going through the 16-bit levels, you're going through 8-bit levels that the Famicom could actually handle. All the zones are represented, with the exception of Scrap Brain Zone, which appears to have been, fittingly, scrapped. The levels are also fairly well-designed approximations of their 16-bit counterparts, with the music not being terrible for what one might expect. It's not perfect, and there are some issues with the music. And what I'll do is I'll actually do a comparison. So let's say, here's Green Hill Zone from Sonic Genesis. And here's Samari's Green Hill Zone. Now here's Marble Zone. And here's Samari's Marble Zone. So you can hear the difference there. Obviously, it is approximation, and it's close enough. Samari, as a game, though, does have some gameplay issues, which we'll touch upon a bit. But beyond this, it is impressive to say the least. One really clever thing I think that Samari does is with its special stages. The special stages are actually from the Master System version of Sonic, which I think was done because the Genesis version of the special stages might have been too complicated for them to port over with like the rotating maze. So I think what they saw was that the Master System had these easy special stages that are just springs that you're jumping on, and they were like, this we can port. Another thing about Samari is that there is no Chaos Emeralds. So you go into the special stages basically just to collect lives, and that's about it. There is audio for collecting the Chaos Emeralds, but it goes unused in the game. The only ending you can get is Robotnik juggling the emeralds and telling you to try again. Now, some of the gameplay issues that I mentioned earlier are that the enemies will respawn, and there are a few death pits where Samari can become stuck until the 9-minute timer has elapsed. This is obnoxious, especially on real hardware, as you can't easily jump to a save state. Real hardware does make the game feel a bit easier to play, as emulation can cause a bit of input lag that makes some of the more frustrating segments just obnoxious. But again, it's kind of like a monkey's paw thing, right? I think this is the second time I've said monkey's paw in one of our episodes. But anyway, you are like, I want to play Somari, but I want to have save states. But you can't play it with accurate input because emulation is just not always the same as playing it on real hardware. Not exactly related to the gameplay of Somari, but just another fun fact about it. Somari was featured in the TV show Dendy the New Reality, where it was reviewed by host Sergei Serpanov, who noted the game was accurate to its source material. And that's kind of cool.
Now, Hummer Team didn't stop at Somari in terms of Sonic ports. They actually went back and reworked the game to create Sonic the Hedgehog, sometimes called Sonic 3D Blast 5, which removes Somari and adds Sonic. Sonic the Hedgehog for the Famicom feels almost like a patched, updated version of Somari. Some of the inescapable pits have now been made less inescapable, and other bugs have been fixed. This version of the game also begins at Spring Yard Zone. It appears this version is pretty common on multi-carts, specifically the one put out by JY, a frequent collaborator with Hummer Team. Two other variants exist, Sonic and Knuckles 5, which adds this title sequence and music, and Sonic 3D Blast 6. Hummer Team would finally revisit Somari with the release of the Hummer. This game was released on a Super New Year Cart 15-1, containing other Hummer Team games. This replaces Somari with the Hummer Team mascot, which is a donkey-looking guy with shoes. The art for the Hummer seems to have been done by Hummer Chang himself, as he did some illustrations during this time. Another version, the Hummer, was also put on the Samurai 60-in-1 Famicom, which has different background graphics and really looks nice. But guess what? We're not done. Somari's legacy continues. Family TSI, a Thai electronics company, got into the game market and released Family Kid, not to be confused with the game Family Dog.
Or the TV show Family Guy.
Which, to be fair, if you're going to confuse anything between Family Kid, Family Dog, and Family Guy, you should probably just watch Family Guy, because I'm assuming Family Kid, and we know for a fact Family Dog, are garbage games. Now, Family Kid appears to be a hack of Somari directly, but not one of the later Sonic versions, as all of the original glitches still remain intact. The game replaces Somari with Family Kid, who is a superhero-looking guy who is sometimes missing parts of his head. As we said, if you're going to get confused with Family something, watch Family Feud or watch Family Guy. Don't play these games. Interestingly enough, the Family Kid cartridges are actually multi-carts, though it's dependent on if specific jumpers are actually soldered. If you were to put a blob of solder in the right place, you could actually access a menu that allows you to play either Family Kid or Aladdin 4, which is a title screen hack of Aladdin by Hummer Team.
Now, lastly, and I think probably the most interesting version of the Somari variants is Doraemon. This is a game made by a company called Fushu Waixing, who I think I've mentioned before in like my recently plays. Fushu Waixing was a company in Fushu, China, who put out a bunch of like RPGs and stuff and did a lot of translation hacks. But Doraemon is a version of Somari that features Doraemon, the cartoon cat. However, it's not just like Somari with Doraemon. It's an entirely reworked game. Completely different levels. The graphics are completely different. The enemies are completely different. The music has been completely changed. It just is a completely different game just built into the Somari engine. Though, it should be noted, while the graphics are different, they are not unique. Most of the graphics are stolen from games like Little Samson, Wacky Races, and even Hummer Team's Aladdin. They stole a bunch of art from that. Now, Doraemon is a little less difficult than Somari. In Somari, if you were carrying, let's say, for example, 100 rings, and you get hit by a badnik, you lose every single ring that you have collected, which is annoying. In Doraemon, you only lose 20 rings at a time, which is nice because it at least makes you feel like you're not losing everything. Now, before we go into just some other games that feature Sonic and also happen to be on the Famicom, it's good to note that some fans have actually gone in and reworked Somari almost from the ground up. There is a Sonic improvement hack for Somari done by a hacker called the Jabu, and this not only makes the music sound way better, and I'll put in an example here. So here's Somari Green Hill Zone. And here's the Jabu's version of Green Hill Zone. But it also features bug fixes and color palette changes and sprite reworks. It's a really impressive version of Somari, made to feel like Sonic could have come out on the Famicom. But with that, we're going to transition now into something completely different. Because Sonic didn't just explore the world of Somari and such, there was also just some weird like hacks and stuff that exist. On the other side of things, we have a game called Super Mario and Sonic 2, Sonic spelled with a K for some reason, which is a hack of Chip and Dale 2, but contains Sonic and Mario. The game is exactly like Chip and Dale 2, except Mario and Sonic are now playable, and one of the versions of the game crashes after the first few stages. There is also another hack out there called Sonic Bros, which, as the name might imply, is just a sprite hack of Super Mario Brothers. Some of the art in the game has been changed to have a more Sonic aesthetic. Some of the Goombas are now robots and you have rings instead of coins, but it's basically Super Mario Brothers. However, apparently there is a cartridge version that exists that was sold that starts at the glitched World 0 because they used a pirated ROM that was pulled from a multi-cart. Just a fun fact about Super Mario Brothers ROMs, a lot of times when Super Mario Brothers was illegally put onto multi-carts, the level placement that you would start was actually determined by the multi-cart's menu. So if you were on page 1, you start on World 1. If you were on page 2, you start on World 2. Now, some pirates were lazy, and when they were getting versions of Mario to put on, their own cartridges and sell them illegally, they just took the version off the multi-cart, which had this feature intact. So thus, the game would just start at World 0, and that means it's broken because World 0 loops. Now, there is also another game just called Sonic, and this is a sprite hack of Adventure Island and is not that interesting, so that's all that I'm going to say on that. But that's not all.
World Heroes 2 is another interesting game, as it's a fighting game that not only has Sonic in it, but also Mario, Goku, Leonardo, Mike Hager, Bowser, and Ryu, and a few other random people in it. So if you ever wanted to have Sonic beat the crap out of Goku, get World Heroes 2. It was developed by Konisoft, who had previously published the Street Fighter II The World Warrior title from Hummer Team.
I should also clarify, though, this is World Heroes 2, the bootleg Famicom game. There is a real World Heroes 2 by SNK, which does not feature Mario or Sonic in it.
Does it feature Goku?
No. World Heroes 2, the SNK game, the official game, just features some SNK characters. World Heroes 2, the bootleg, came out according to the copyright on the main menu, 1994.
When did Super Smash Bros. Come out?
The original Super Smash Bros. Came out in 1999.
Do you think that somebody got a copy of a bootleg World Heroes 2 over at Nintendo, booted it up, and was like, man, Sonic fighting Mario? I have an idea.
Well, what's funny is you say that, but I remember seeing like a comment on a World Heroes 2 video on YouTube, and I swear someone in the comments was like, growing up, this was our Super Smash Brothers.
I mean, it was, right? At the end of the day. I mean, I don't think it was, know if it's any good. Like, once again, these companies, they don't have a lot of money. They may have a lot of talent, but they just... They
have a lot of heart, at least.
They have a lot of heart. They have a lot of heart, at least. And they're trying to back into certain things. And backing into something versus creating something yourself is not necessarily it doesn't always create the best product. But anyway, finally we have Jurassic Boy 2, which we kind of touched upon in our Sashin episode. Kind of a special exception to these other games, as it's an unlicensed game and not a bootleg game. And the difference is that when it's an unlicensed game, that means that they were developers who didn't get the license for a product and just made it anyway. When it's a bootleg, they generally take a product and they make it into something else.
I mean, that could be one definition. I tend to define it as an unlicensed game is a game that does not have authorization from the main party. So like, for example, Tetris by Tengen is an unlicensed game because Nintendo didn't authorize the release of Tetris by Tengen. But Tetris by Tengen is not a bootleg game because it's not stealing anyone's IP, technically. For all intents and purposes, Tengen assumed they had the right to it. So with Jurassic Boy 2, it's not like stealing any assets or anything from Sonic or any other games. It's its own original game. It's just kind of like Sonic.
Right, but I think there's also a point where a bootleg game is also not authorized.
Well, a bootleg game is an unlicensed game, but not all unlicensed games are bootlegs. It's like a box and a rectangle.
That's fair. Regardless, Jurassic Boy 2 is an unlicensed game that was created by Saturn. It's a sequel to nothing because there's no Jurassic Boy 1. It's just literally called Jurassic Boy 2. You play as Chen, who's a raptor who can run real fast. And you have to save your family from a mad scientist who's trying to steal the giant dinosaur gene to bring dinosaurs to the future because then they would make him tons of money. Jurassic Boy 2 is odd in more ways than one. It's a bit more fluid than Samaria at times, but you end up running faster than the screen can catch up, and you often smack into various enemies way before you see them because you can't actually see where you're going. Chen also can't spin dash, but he can go through a lot of loop-de-loops within the game. This game was also put onto the Game Boy Color, and before we end things, I guess we could talk about the good old Super Famicom. Now, Sonic, of course, was represented on the 16-bit system. Down in Peru, there was the Twin Eagles group, which for fans of bootlegs and memes, Twin Eagles group made Mundial Ronahildo Soccer 64 for the N64. Ronaldinho Soccer! Which was a bootleg hack of International Superstar Soccer 64. Now, Twin Eagles Group also did some hacks for the SNES, specifically Sonic the Hedgehog, which would get packaged as Sonic the Hedgehog 4. The game is not like our previous games discussed. It is not an original production. Rather, it's a ROM hack that changes the graphics of Speedy Gonzales Logazos Banditos, an SNES platformer that feels a lot like a Sonic ripoff with a Sonic sprite, so then it feels even more like a Sonic ripoff.
Yeah, so like they took a game that feels a lot like a Sonic game and put Sonic in it.
Now, Sonic replaces Speedy, and instead of rescuing mice, which was what Speedy Gonzales does, who is also a mouse, in case you are young and don't know who Speedy Gonzales is. Now, in the Sonic the Hedgehog 4 by Twin Eagles Group, Sonic replaces Speedy, and instead of rescuing mice, you rescue Mario. He even says his name when you rescue him. Mario! It's an odd sort of game because it does kind of feel like a Sonic game, but maybe if no one knew what Sonic games felt like. The packaging, though, is great. One release just minorly altered the Sonic 3 art, while other art used badly stretched out Sonic the Knuckles art. Twin Eagles Group also put out a hack of Sparkster, which adds Sonic graphics. This version is technically lost media, with only one fan recreation of the ROM being available thanks to the data of Sonic's graphics from Twin Eagles Group being found. So, was there Sonic on the Famicom and Super Famicom? Not officially, no. But you could see it if you used your imagination and thought any of the games that we talked about were any good. It's the Sonic at home.
A lot of these games kind of feel like it's like you're like, Mom, can I have Sonic? And your mom's like, we have Sonic at home, dear. And this is Sonic at home. Anyway, that wraps it up for our Sonic on the Famicom and Super Famicom episode. Just a fun little episode that we wanted to talk about. You know, I have an interest in bootlegs. I know Seth likes talking. So that's our episode. And we're now going to get into our retro rewind. So Seth, do you want to take it away?
Sure. Zach had me play Pugsy, which was a 1993 puzzle platformer developed by Traveler's Tale and released by Psygnosis. It was released in March of 93 for the EU and then in January of 94 for the North American audience. So the game is a standard platformer which has aspects of a puzzle game layered in top of it. In it, you play as an alien-like creature that is designed graphically to look like a space hopper, which is a British term, I believe.
Yeah, space hoppers are like those...
They're an American exercise ball with handles.
Yes, that were really popular when, like, at least I was growing up.
It's like an exercise ball with handles that you sit on and you bounce around on it. This character, Pugsy, is brown. So he's a brown ball with handles on it. and he's like kind of little, he looks like poop. Anyway, you play as Pugsy, and the puzzle aspect that's layered in is that your Pugsy is often required to find objects and carry them around to either specific locations or to use them. The game is done by Traveler's Tale, and it plays really well. It holds up for today. It definitely would appeal to a younger audience, as an older audience would probably get a bit fatigued playing through the 57 levels that are designed for a younger audience in mind. However, just as a callback, there is a level called Wabbit's World, which harkens back to the game that Zach played recently called Wiz and Liz. But overall, great game. Definitely if you're looking for a puzzle platformer on the Genesis, you would not go wrong with playing Pugsy. Next week, Zach, you can continue along your X-Men theme and play X-Men 2, The Fall of the Mutants for MS-DOS.
I will. Thank you, Seth. Seth had me play X-Men Madness in Murder World, which is a game that came out for MS-DOS in 1989 by Paragon Software. It's a side-scrolling arcade game where you play as a member of the X-Men, and you're pitted against Magneto and Arcade, two classic villains who I don't think really have any need to be working together, because Magneto's whole shtick is he's like, you know, trying to like do mutant rights his own way, and Arcade's whole shtick is he likes to suck people into video games.
But Arcade could hang out with Mojo.
Arcade and Mojo probably would get along. Yeah. They're probably like best friends, but I think Magneto would be annoyed by Arcade. Anyway, they teamed up in this game, and tell you, Seth, I tried my darndest to play this game and play it well. I downloaded the original manual, which was like a scanned PDF, and I went through it. I went through it page by page. I just couldn't figure out how to do anything but walk forward and die. When you start the game, you start off as Cyclops, and Professor X's head appears, and he's like, "My powers are weakened here. Go, my mutant student, and go use your powers to fight Magneto." And you walk forward and a sentinel shoots you until you die. And you can't walk past the sentinel. I tried. You can go around him, but the door that's behind the sentinel is locked until you kill him. And I couldn't figure out how to fight him. And I pressed every key on my keyboard. There is apparently a way where you're supposed to like press spacebar and navigate to a certain part of this menu and then use the ability. But that wasn't working for me. Specifically when I was on the screen with the Sentinel. When I started the game, I could navigate the menu fine, but for some reason, the moment the Sentinel shows up, the menu locked, and I was only able to go to the movement screen and the character select screen. So Cyclops died, and he was replaced by Dazzler, and I pounded the keyboard even more, and eventually I was able to do like a kick, though I think I did it by accident, because I couldn't figure out how to do it again. And then I died, and then I got replaced by Wolverine, and then I died, and then I got replaced by Storm, and then I gave up. Great game. 10 out of 10. Highly recommend. One fun thing I liked is that the theme to the game is Entrance of the Gladiators, aka the circus song that goes... Perfect song for an X-Men game. Really happy that's the theme. Next week, Seth, you can play Star Wars for MS-DOS. Not Super Star Wars, not Star Wars Dark Forces, not Star Wars X-Wing, Star Wars, period, for MS-DOS.
Nice. I'm looking forward to it.
And with that, I want to thank everyone for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed this episode, you liked hearing about some oddities in the gaming world, specifically bootleg games, let us know and we'll be glad to do another one. That being said, though, you can reach out to classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com or reach out to us via our website, classicgamingbrothers.com. We're available wherever podcasts can be found, be it Podbean, iHeartRadio, or iTunes. We're also available on Facebook, Classic Gaming Brothers, Instagram, Classic Gaming Brothers, X CG Brothers Pod, and Blue Sky CG Brothers Pod. And with that, Seth, am I forgetting anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
That's right.